Okay, what was in your miso soup?
Stop! Let's go back home.
What was in your miso soup is basically the were you poor question growing up in Japan. So it's the equivalent of did you eat the government cheese or something like that in America. As everybody knows, miso soup, it's eaten with rice, and every culture has what I call a food lubricant. So we eat a lot of bread, so we always have bread with butter or margarine, and that helps the food get past your tonsils basically. So it's just a flavored food lubricant, and that's what miso soup is. I grew up in a working class area, and although I wasn't dirt poor or anything, certainly not rich by any stretch of the imagination, and we always had margarine, and not that many people had butter, because butter was a lot more expensive. So we generally grew up on margarine and sandwich bread, and that was the norm. And a cheap topping was Vegemite or jam. So a lot of the people I grew up with, including myself, we would eat sandwiches with just some margarine and Vegemite, and that was like a stock standard calorie provider. And in Japan, it's always a bowl of rice and miso soup. So what sort of gets the class angle going is what was in your miso soup. So if you just had miso with a little bit of seaweed in it, that's the equivalent of a government cheese sandwich. So you'll often hear people talk about what they put in their miso soup, or what they had in their miso soup growing up, and it's pretty much a gauge of sort of were you working class or rich. More wealthy people in Japan, they would have maybe some fresh seafood in with their miso soup in the mornings, a bit of scallops, some nice prawns, clams, things like this, and that's because they can afford it, obviously. So they can make their miso soup a bit more flavorful and a bit more luxurious. So it's a little bit of what do you call it? It's a little bit of a snobbery when people talk about the luxurious things that they put in their miso soup. So it's not to be taken too seriously, but you can gauge somebody's sort of social level when they talk about what they have in their miso soup. So what spurred this video on is I got an email from a subscriber. He came to my cafe about a month ago, and I mentioned that I'm out of Vegemite. And he said, I'll send you some. So he's just sent me an email saying that he's going to send some Vegemite up. So you often find people, Americans for example, they will say when they grew up that they ate the government cheese and it wasn't too bad, and they'd still eat it now. So they might be like software engineers and successful people, but they still remember the taste of poverty, so to speak. And this is why a lot of food trends don't change in Japan as well, because the bog standard miso soup, which is basically a food lubricant, people just play around with it as their financial sort of levels change throughout life. But they still never give up the actual miso. So it's similar to Italians. Italians love their olive oil. Turkish people, Greek people, Maltese people, they'll never give up their olive oil because they grew up using olive oil with their bread. They don't eat a lot of butter usually in the Mediterranean, but that's a bog standard thing. And I'm sure they'd have discussions on where they got their olive oil from, if it was extra virgin or pomace oil or whatever. So that would be a gauge of somebody's level growing up. And Japan's no different. And a lot of people have a bit of an idea of how Japanese people eat just based on what's available in their own country, but that's not actually home style food. There used to be a dish in Australia called bubble and squeak, and bubble and squeak was the leftovers from the night before, and it would all be cut up, and an egg would be a whisk egg would be thrown in, and it would just be fried in a fry pan and put on a bit of toast, and that was called bubble and squeak when I grew up. So it's basically leftovers with a scrambled egg in it, reheated, sauteed in a pan, and just chucked on a bit of bread. And that was a very popular breakfast item growing up, because people didn't waste anything. And that's what happens here in Japan, working class areas, country areas, is they have their little side dishes at night, and they might not finish them all. Might have 5 or 6 different little dishes. They might not finish them all, and they'll put whatever's left inside their miso soup. So in the morning they'll cook up their miso soup, and they'll put their leftover potatoes, maybe a little bit of pork or whatever that they didn't finish last night, a bit of tofu, and they'll just put that in to their miso soup and eat it with their rice. So this is pretty much a Japanese bubble and squeak, and every culture's got it, a dish like this. And the Japanese, what they had in their miso soup is an indication of where they're at in life, I suppose, financially. So sometimes you hear this question, what did your mum put in your miso soup growing up, or what are you putting in your miso soup, and whatever. So it's a bit of a gauge on how somebody's doing, I suppose, in life. So growing up, it's probably a little bit the same now, but prawns or shrimp is extremely expensive in Australia, and most people could only eat it maybe around Christmas time. So it was a bit of a treat. So to see people eating shrimp sandwiches is just absolutely hedonistic in Australia. We had a term for these people, and they just have like their normal sandwich bread, and they put super expensive prawns on their sandwich, and we used to call them the prawn sandwich brigade. So this was a bit of a flex by the rich. They'd have their little picnics on their $400 rugs, and they'd pull out the prawn sandwiches. So people used to think of these people as, you know, exactly what they are, flexing. But that was a thing in Australia. So Australia's a little bit of a class sort of society as well. Maybe it comes from the Brits. But what was actually on the sandwich sort of made a difference. So just having Vegemite compared to prawns, that would be half a day's wages sitting on one sandwich. That was a thing as well. So it's quite funny when you sort of see how it actually works at the grassroots level here in Japan, and not just sort of seeing a cuisine in a restaurant or something like that. Just how people eat normally, and how normal people organise themselves and rear their children and things like this on low budgets. And this is what it's all about. Real food in a real cultural setting. So the Japanese just view miso soup as we would view butter or margarine. So it's just flavoured to whatever they can afford at the time. Butter was very expensive growing up, at least for my household. So we grew up on margarine, and everyone knows how nasty margarine is. But they had food laws of what you could call butter, what you could call margarine, and there was another product that came out. It's probably still available, and spread. So it wasn't even good enough to be called margarine, but that was quite a popular thing where I grew up as well. Had this thing called spread. So if something's not sort of good enough quality to be called margarine, you can imagine just how bad it is. I've done a couple of videos on ramen and ramen restaurants, and as everyone knows, I've got a cafe myself, so I have a bit of an idea of how dishes fit into a culture and sort of what price bracket they should be sold at. And ramen's one of the hardest businesses to get into. And a bowl of ramen is pretty much like a burger is in the West. There's only so much you can charge for a burger, and there's only so much you can charge for a bowl of ramen. So you probably never find a bowl of ramen that's over 10,000 yen, which is $7 US. So there's a psychological ceiling at that sort of $7 US mark, or 10 yen, that people won't pay over. So ramen is a working class man's dish. It has the broth, usually with lots of vitamins and things, and the noodles is the bulk out. So this is supposed to be cheap calories, that's tasty and affordable. Much like a burger is when people buy a burger on the run. They need their bread, a little bit of meat, a bit of salad, and they're usually satisfied with that to get them through the day. And that's pretty much how it is with a bowl of ramen as well. It's not some exotic dish. It's basically an ordinary man's, working man's dish to get him through the day. That's not going to break the bank. And it's a lot of foreigners' wishes to open a ramen shop in Japan. But of all the food businesses you could open, and especially in Japan, that's one of the toughest. You'll notice whenever you go to a ramen restaurant, they'll have a base bowl of ramen. So it'll be the house stock or the house broth, and it'll just have the noodles in it, and maybe a bit of garnish, that's all. And that's the base level noodle. So that's your Vegemite sandwich right there, your super basic sandwich. And then from there they'll charge for add-ons often. If you want an egg in it, that's another $1. A couple more bits of pork, that's another $1 or $2. So you sort of, depending on your budget, you would make it a bit fancier. So this is similar to the miso soup. So if you're on a low budget, you just have your basic miso soup with maybe little bits of seaweed in it with your rice. And this sort of thing is also how ramen restaurants are structured. So if you go into a ramen restaurant and you can really only afford $4 for lunch that day, you'll get the basic bowl of noodles for 600 yen or something. So it'll just be the basic noodle with the broth. And if you feel like splurging, you'll go up to like $9.50 or something and get nori and some meat and different veggies and some eggs and things like this. So this is the working man's basic calorie thing. And the broth in a bowl of noodles pretty much acts the way butter would in a sandwich. It just helps you get the noodles past your tonsils. And ramen shops, they compete on basically how flavorful their broth is, because there's not a lot of difference between the noodle, because most ramen shops don't make their own noodles anymore, because it's laborious and it's not cost effective. So back in the day it used to be all handmade, but nowadays it's not. It's very hard to find a place that's handmade, and that's because of this ceiling of the 10 yen, 1,000 yen ceiling. Most places just can't do it. So the only sort of difference, competitive difference that you can make is providing a more flavorful soup with your own sort of ingredients. So it's similar to if you have butter and you buy Lurpak butter, which is a quality butter, European butter, or a New Zealand butter, that's a step up from maybe most local butters, just because of the quality of the product. So posh people, they don't mind to pay double for a pack of Lurpak in Australia, getting their butter all the way from Europe when the local butter's quite good. But people who have the money will get the Lurpak, and they'll make sure everyone knows that they eat Lurpak butter. So you'll see the same thing happening in Japan with the quality of miso paste. So I'm starting to get a taste for good quality stuff, different miso. I've got one of my friends who makes miso in my village, such here, and it's awesome. So that would be like a Lurpak butter. So all miso's pastes are not the same, and sorry, just give me a sec, I've just got to get across. So if you want to up your game as far as miso paste is concerned, because you'll be eating or drinking a lot of miso soup while you're here, I really suggest that you get into it. And I've been getting into all the different types of flavors and all the funky ways that this stuff gets fermented and stored and produced, and it's a totally different world when you start to understand these sort of things. So it's sort of like eating spread or margarine compared to a super quality New Zealand butter or something. So not all things are the same. Similar to tea. So people who really know their Japanese tea know what they're talking about. I don't drink it, but I can definitely see where they're coming from. All these subtleties and things like this. So also the miso paste that you use growing up, if you're just using the supermarket one, everybody knows that's the cheapie. So it's quite interesting culturally how it is in Japan, and it's pretty much no different to our culture. People who grow up poor or working class or whatever, they have these questions that sort of probe people, and people know a little bit more about them and how they grew up and things, just by asking little simple questions like, what was in your miso soup? So I've just got to go and pick up a friend, and I thought I might just do a quick topic on miso paste. That's maybe a little bit different than people might not think about, but it's actually a thing here. It's a little bit of a class situation, and I thought maybe you might be interested. So anyway guys, I'm almost there, and hope you like the video.